Hello. I'm going to talk to you about a very old story. It comes from the 1960s. There was a huge, and we could probably call it a defining scandal in the British government in the very early 60s, 62, 63. The Secretary of State for War, at that time it was called War, was a man called John Profumo, who was quite a high flyer and tipped to the highest office eventually. But he got entangled in more ways than one with a young woman called Christine Keeler. Much of the media defined Miss Keeler as a prostitute. She wasn't. She was a semi-literate kid who was trying to get along in the city, having been more or less thrown out of the family home. She wasn't intelligent enough to be any sort of Mata Hari or any sort of a schemer, in fact. She was just caught up in a situation well beyond her control and even her abilities to understand. She was 19. She'd fallen, while she was a dancer at a nightclub, she'd fallen in with a regular there called Stephen Ward. And he was a man who'd had lots of society contacts. And one of those contacts was Lord Astor. Stephen Ward took her to a party being held at Astor's home, Cliveden House, where Keeler met John Profumo, and he started a fling with her that lasted about 3 months. She also had an affair with a Russian called Yevgeny Ivanov. He was described as a diplomatic attaché from the Russian embassy, but of course everyone assumed he was some sort of spy. It's possible he zoned in on her because as a diplomat he moved in the same circles as did Profumo. He did meet her at the same party. And maybe he thought she might be useful, but I actually seriously doubt that Keeler could be much of a source of information or use to anyone. In a book Ivanov wrote later, he got a good deal of information simply from the diplomatic social chit-chat. And it seems more likely that so far as Keeler was concerned, he was just interested in a good time. And she put out quite freely at a time when this was not quite so expected as it is now in Britain, and Keeler's attitudes would certainly have been a huge difference from the Soviet women of Ivanov's acquaintance. And then a series of unfortunate events made a connection between Keeler, Ivanov and Profumo. A lot of denials were going on, a lot of suppression in the press, but finally Profumo was asked by a Labour MP if there was any truth in the allegations. The ostensible reason for the MP's questions were that state secrets could have been transferred from Profumo via Keeler to Ivanov and thence to the Russian government, which of course is total nonsense. But Profumo was asked about the affair in Parliament and he had to answer. And this is when he made his big mistake. Profumo's answer was basically,
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Actually, his literal words were, there was no impropriety whatsoever in my acquaintanceship with Miss Keeler. But as you will have surmised, I use the former phraseology for a reason. When a few months later Keeler was asked under oath about her relationship with Profumo, she confirmed that there had been an affair. What happened next? Well, Profumo resigned. And he resigned because he had lied to the House of Commons. He'd actually lied to the MPs, and because the MPs were representatives of the people, he had lied to the people of Britain. A little later, the government of the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, collapsed, mostly because of Profumo's lie and the aura this gave to his whole government. This was a time when, whatever we thought about the politics of those in government, he, and I'm afraid it usually was a he then, he, the politician, was supposed to tell the truth when asked a direct question. I told you that story because I wanted to remind us all that there really was a time when politicians were expected to resign if they told lies to the British public. And even if they told lies which were lies of, what's the word, when you just don't know what you're talking about, but you insist you do anyway. That's not exactly a lie. I'm going to show you a few examples now of lies we're being told by our politicians. But what gets me is why we expect lies from those in government in the way that we used to expect the truth. And I don't know how that happened. I've been thinking about that all day, ever since my last video, when I was talking about Macron giving adding a fuel tax and saying it was because he was being ecologically responsible, when we all know that it was because he needed the money, because the French budget is overstretched by the support they're having to give to a lot of immigrants they can't handle. And how the EU is lying about its intentions. And we're allowing this to happen. And there are many good people in this country, in the United Kingdom, who want to stay in the EU, even though they know that the EU is lying to them. And they're insisting that the Brexiteers are lying to them. There is no concept of truth anymore, except for a few people on YouTube. I'm hoping I'm one of them. I'd really like to know, though, how we got to this state, because it's very difficult to work out why people would prefer. They voted for Macron. They vote for people they know are lying to them. They prefer the comfort of stories to the bright light of reality. And I don't know when that happened. I know it wasn't in the 60s, so sometime between there and here, people became different. I honestly don't understand it. I wish I could give you all an answer, but I can't. But perhaps the important thing is that we talk about this, that we realise what we're doing, that we realise we are, as a society, preferring lies and stories that are soothing and promise good things, even though we know that they're not going to happen. If we're aware of that, maybe we'll be able to wake up and reverse this, because, of course, when you're lying to yourself, it's like walking through a minefield with a blindfold on. You can reassure yourself that everything's going to be all right, but sooner or later, you're going to step on that button. Anyway, here are the lies my father told me.
Today this train is completely ram-packed. The staff on the train are absolutely brilliant, working really hard to help everybody. The reality is there's not enough trains. We need more of them.
Sitting on the floor between carriages looked great on camera, but turns out there was less convenient footage too. On the train here in London, the footage suggests Jeremy Corbyn walked straight through several carriages with empty spaces, making his way right to the back of the train to film his video. Then, 15 minutes later, and job done, he returned to Coach H to take a seat.
I'm the one who will not raise taxes.
And forge a new role for ourselves in the world. Because Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
This is a dangerous fantasy. The idea that there's going to be a European Air Force, a European army, it is simply not true. It is simply not true. It is simply not true.
I'm very grateful for financial contributions. But if you don't want to give money, you can still help a lot by sharing this and other videos I've made. Also, remember to check your subscription from time to time, as sometimes subscriptions get erased for one reason or another. Till next time.